This is the History of New Zealand podcast on the Eat to My Own Beat podcast network. I'm Clive Turner. This is episode 1 of the History of New Zealand podcast, The Maori Arrival and Settlement. New Zealand was first settled by Polynesians from eastern Polynesia. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests that humans emigrated from Taiwan via Southeast Asia to Melanesia and then radiated eastwards into the Pacific in pulses and waves of discovery, which gradually colonized islands from Samoa and Tonga all the way to Hawaii, the Marquesas, Easter Island, the Society Islands, and finally, New Zealand. According to oral tradition, Kupe was the first discoverer of New Zealand, or Aotearoa. In New Zealand, there are no human artifacts or remains dating earlier than the Kaharoa Tefra, a layer of volcanic debris deposited by the Mount Tarawera eruption around 1314. The 1999 dating of some Kiore, Polynesian rat bones, to as early as 100 CE was later found to be an error. New samples of rat bone, and also of rat-gnawed shells and woody seed cases, mostly gave dates later than the Tarawera eruption, with only 3 samples giving slightly earlier dates. Pollen evidence of widespread forest fires a decade or two before the eruptions has been interpreted by some scientists as a possible sign of human presence, leading to a suggested first settlement period of 1280–1320. However, the most recent synthesis of archaeological and genetic evidence concludes that, whether or not some settlers arrived before the Tarawera eruption, the main settlement period was in the decades after it, somewhere between 1320 and 1350, possibly involving a coordinated mass migration. This scenario is also supported by a much debated and now largely ignored third line of evidence: traditional genealogies which point to 1350 as a probable arrival date for the main founding canoes from which most Maori trace their descent. The descendants of these settlers became known as the Māori, forming a distinct culture of their own. The latter settlement of the tiny Chatham Islands in the east of New Zealand about 1500 produced the Moriori. Linguistic evidence indicates that the Moriori were mainland Maori who ventured eastward. There is no evidence of a pre-Maori civilization in mainland New Zealand. The original settlers quickly exploited the abundant large game in New Zealand, such as moa, which were large flightless ratites pushed to extinction by about 1500. As moa and other large game became scarce or extinct, Maori culture underwent major change, with regional differences. In areas where it was possible to grow taro and kumara, horticulture became more important. This was not possible in the south of the South Island. But wild plants such as fernroot were often available, and cabbage trees were harvested and cultivated for food. Warfare also increased in importance, reflecting increased competition for land and other resources. In this period, fortified PA became more common, although there is debate about the actual frequency of warfare. As elsewhere in the Pacific, cannibalism was part of warfare. Maori Wanao from Rotorua in the 1880s, Maori Wanao, extended family, from Rotorua in the 1880s. Many aspects of Western life and culture, including European clothing and architecture, became incorporated into Maori society during the 19th century. Leadership was based on a system of chieftainship, which was often but not always hereditary, although chiefs, male or female, needed to demonstrate leadership abilities to avoid being superseded by more dynamic individuals. The most important units of pre-European Maori society were the whanau, or extended family, and the hapu, or group of whanau. After these came the iwi, or tribe, consisting of groups of hapu. Related hapu would often trade goods and cooperate on major projects, but conflict between hapu was also relatively common. Traditional Maori society preserved history orally through narratives, songs, and chants. Skilled experts could recite the tribal genealogies, wakapapa, back for hundreds of years. Arts included waikorero, oratory, song composition in multiple genres, dance forms including haka, as well as weaving, highly developed wood carving, and tamoko, tattoo. New Zealand has no native land mammals, apart from some rare bats, so birds, fish, and sea mammals were important sources of protein. Maori cultivated food plants which they had brought with them from Polynesia, including sweet potatoes, called kumara, taro, gourds, and yams. They also cultivated the cabbage tree, a plant endemic to New Zealand, and exploited wild foods such as fern root, which provided a starchy paste. Thank you for listening to the History of New Zealand podcast. Join us every Tuesday at noon Pacific for new episodes. Find us on Facebook at the History of New Zealand podcast, on YouTube, and at www.eattomyownbeat.com.